All right, I'm gonna start the Instagram early just to see if we are getting that whole shadow ban thing. But we
Yep.
have six in the waiting room or five in the waiting room already, so that's cool.
Great. We'll load them in a minute here.
Hello.
Um, Lynn, can you make me a co-host? That way I can queue up that poll.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
Jared, just a note, you want to be in like the very middle of your screen because on Instagram it's the vertical, so it'll cut your face off.
I want to mute new participants too, if
I think
it's
that's
possible.
wise.
Yeah. Do we know how to make that a setting?
I think you have to set it
I think I
when
made a requirement when I made this meeting.
yeah, it's on mute all upon entry. It's already on. And it
Cool.
says it's allowing participants to unmute themselves. I'm gonna turn that off just so people can't unmute themselves. I'll just unmute them if they ask a question.
Okay, cool.
I don't see the polls on here. This is weird. You could just give me an extra minute here before we let them in because I want to set that up and maybe Jack, if you don't mind looking into that, if you're not doing other things at the same time here. We want to ask, here, I'll Slack you.
Should we be concerned that the live stream seems to have some flickering connection?
On Instagram.
Is that where this is being broadcast?
It's on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. It just runs a little behind,
Okay.
Okay.
but so it's gonna like I wouldn't suggest paying attention to it because it'll completely throw you off.
To
But I
the actual
watched
stream
from
while we're
like
doing it?
what?
To the stream itself while we're doing it? I'm only talking about the connection icon in the top left corner. It seems like it's fading
Oh
in it.
no, it just does that. It's
Just
showing
back
it's
to
like
that.
live.
Oh, okay.
It's a way for it to
Yeah.
try to explain that it's a live thing happening now.
No, we're getting 29 frames per second. Yeah, we've got excellent stream quality, is what Restream is telling me. So
How is the audio?
you
The
guys
sound?
sound good to me. I typically, when we start, leave the room and go check Instagram as well. So if something's happening, I'll let you know. But I can't tell from the Instagram when I have it pulled up. But we've got 9 people already waiting to get in.
Mm,
Let me know when you all are ready, and I can start letting just admit everybody.
Give me like one more minute. I'm just trying to troubleshoot this. I think I have to turn on the polls because I think they're not enabled.
Okay, no worries. And then just a reminder for at the end, make sure to plug the Discord.
Yep, I have it on the list.
You got
Okay.
a link that we can drop into it.
Yeah, I'll have a link for you. I'll also Slack you a link.
I would even include that at the beginning as well, Quinn, just to say shout outs at the beginning and the end where for more hot takes and hot tips. You can find them in real time in the Discord.
Cool. I have that queued up.
Okay, I'm hoping, oh yeah, here we go, polls and quizzes. Okay, great, I can launch it now, done. Phew. All right, I am ready. Well, actually, give me 1 second, let me just situate, turn off all my notifications. Focus mode. Done. Okay, let's do it.
All right. I'm admitting.
Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. Hi, everybody. Hi, welcome, welcome. Super excited everyone's here. Thank you for coming on this fine Thursday. We'll just give folks another second to get their audio connected and all these things. Great, I'm seeing some wonderful faces. I'm Victoria, everybody. Nice to meet you. All right. Fantastic. So we are so excited for our event today to talk about launching your political campaign. And I will kick things off pretty promptly here because we've got a lot to cover and we've got a lot of good wisdom to share. I hope you all have some questions that you're considering, things you're wondering about, so that we can incorporate those into the conversation with Jared here, who I will introduce momentarily. But just welcome everybody. Thank you for coming and wanting to spend some time with us on this topic. And I'll just quickly introduce myself, but we are going to cover today some really juicy things. We're going to talk about the importance of a campaign launch, preparing to launch, crafting and delivering your message, engaging with the media, what to do the day of the event, what to do after the launch, and how to maintain your momentum. And then we'll also do an extended Q&A where if you have anything specifically that you want to cover, we'd love to hear what your questions are. My name is Victoria. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at Good Party. I just want to quickly acknowledge Rob Booth was supposed to be our host today. He lives in the great state of Maine that just had a huge dump of snow happen. They went from green, beautiful day yesterday to just covered in snow. And so he does not have power still, really wanted to be here, literally tried to leave his house in his car to go find a place with power, ended up in the ditch. Thankfully, okay. So he really wanted to be here. He tried really hard and I was like, no, you just need to stay home. So I'm excited to attempt to take his place. But I'm the Chief Operating Officer. I've been with Good Party for 2.5 years. So I lead the organization building side, bringing together the right people, building the right systems, making sure we have everything we need to take on our movement and take on our mission here. And I'm super excited to really kick off this first that's going to be of many where we're doing these trainings for you along your journey, as a candidate, along your campaign journey. This one, I think we wanted to do in a, timely way. It's affecting a lot of people right now where you are with preparing to launch, thinking about launching, already launching, or just having launched your campaign. And our goal is with the programming that we provide that's going to, roughly match where most folks are in their campaign cycle so that it's really relevant and timely for the challenges that you may be facing and the questions that you have. And so I'd love to introduce Jared, who is going to be our expert today. And, we want to just make this the most effective experience we can for you. If you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat. And I may also, if you're someone on video, I may then, say, hey, do you want to ask your question yourself and unmute? But even if you're just tuning in, not on video, you can post something in the chat And I'll do my best to ask those questions of Jared throughout as we go through each of these stages around launching a campaign. And then we'll also have a dedicated Q&A at the end, so that you can ask any questions when you've kind of heard all the good juicy pieces here. So thanks for everyone who's just joined us. Really excited to see the turnout here. Let's introduce Jared. Jared, please tell us about yourself before we dive into all the good wisdom you have to share.
Thank you, Victoria. Hey, everybody. And before I even get into who I am and how we are putting this training together, I do want to shout out the folks who are already in our Discord community. I would be remiss if I didn't remind people that this was actually a programming that was voted on deliberatively. We put out a poll in our Discord channel. We had an assumption that folks would want to talk a little bit about campaign launch, and you guys proved us right. But stick taps to those who proved that we can still operate deliberatively and collaboratively in our politics today, because there are so many reminders of how that doesn't work, that it's always refreshing to see people come together, agree on something, and bring everyone together like we are tonight to talk about how we can continue chipping away at this big problem that we have. My name is Jared Alper. I'm Good Party's political director. I live in New York City, and I have spent my career working to try and fix this crazy, chaotic, tribal, broken, whatever adjective you want to use, political system that we've gotten. I have started my career running campaigns, originally actually within the two-party system. I ran campaigns for Democrats and Republican candidates, and very quickly realized that even the good ones, the ones who are pro-democracy in nature, people who are coming in with good intentions but are running under the banners of one of the two parties, they find that the incentives don't govern good, or don't encourage and incentivize good behavior. And I think after a lot of disappointment and seeing our political system deteriorate further and further into madness and partisanship and corruption and chaos, I had my I'm out moment in 2017, and have been working to help support independent candidates since then, running campaigns, serving and sitting in sort of the chief strategic role for many candidates, including several who are running for federal office, and many, many more since I've joined Good Party towards the end of the 2020 cycle, which is remarkable to say out loud, given it's 4 years later, and we're back in a presidential election year. So I help build our team out and service candidates, good people who are running across the country for all different levels of government, help work with them to support them in using the tools that we're building to help increase competitiveness and winning independent campaigns in our political environment, and show people that it is possible to win without relying on the political parties and the big money donors that are backing them, and to make sure that we can continue to build and scale this movement of people who can run and win this way. So in particular, I've spent on almost every campaign I've worked on, I've come in at this point in time where we're kind of at in the political cycle, working with candidates who are very early in their journeys, many of whom haven't even formally made the decision to run, and working with them to do a lot of the things that we'll be talking about tonight. How do you take this moment, this opportunity to tell the world essentially that you've made a decision and you're running for office and here's why, and turn it into an opportunity that injects life and momentum and energy into a campaign. So I've seen it. I carry some of the bumps and bruises and scars from launch events where I've had to learn on the fly, but also have seen it done really well. And I'm encouraged by the people who come tonight to learn about how we can make this information available and hopefully put it to good use.
Yes, super grateful to have your expertise here, Jared. And for folks who just joined us, welcome. I just want to give you a little bit of a tour of what we're going to cover so that we're all on board. And then we're going to dive right in with the kind of first stop on the journey here. We are going to cover the importance of a campaign launch, preparing to launch, crafting and delivering your message, engaging with the media, the day of the event, and after the launch, what you do to maintain the momentum. And so again, if you have questions throughout as Jared's talking through this, please put them in the Zoom chat. That way I can incorporate them at each kind of stop along the journey here, and then we'll do the dedicated Q&A at the end for anything you want to ask holistically about launching a campaign. So Jared, let's kick it off with just the baseline here of the importance of a campaign launch and how to be strategic about it. You know, what should we be thinking about from the very outset so that we're on the right track from from this journey from where we're starting?
Yeah, and I think I've got a little visual aid. We won't make this a full-blown presentation, but we've got a couple of slides to help outline what it is we're talking about here. So understanding, what are the things that you need to know when you're at the point in time where you're ready to launch a campaign, right? What are the things that you need to be thinking about to make sure that you get the opportunity to really squeeze as much juice as possible out of this important moment in a campaign's life cycle? And it might sound intuitive, but the first thing to keep in mind is that this is the opportunity to tell people who may have never heard of you before and that you are running for office. And when this is done effectively, it really does set the tone for the entire campaign, right? You're taking people in, you're trying to build excitement and momentum around the idea that you're announcing something of great importance to your community. And when done well, it's an opportunity to fill the sails of your campaign with wind and keep you powered all the way through the election. It is something that you get one chance to do it right. You can't like launch and relaunch a campaign multiple times, obviously. So it's important to be deliberate and really thoughtful and prepared. And we're going to tell you all that goes into doing that effectively, so that this one big opportunity for a campaign where you can take and seize the spotlight will be done correctly and make sure that the campaign is positioned for success throughout the entire election. And like a lot of things in a campaign and life generally, timing is really the driver of how effective a launch can be, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about how to know exactly when the timing is right. But it's important to build around a moment. Make sure that the campaign is ready to be launched. Don't feel like you need to, pick an arbitrary date and time and stick to it no matter what the circumstances of the campaign are. But making sure that the campaign has done the work to set itself up for success and launch at the right moment when you're going to be able to capture all of the things that come out of a successful launch event and an opportunity that are created because of it, so that you can really, really drive forward once you've gotten past that stage in the campaign. We do also make a distinguisher. There are sort of distinctions within the launch process. And I think it's important to name it up front, because I think when candidates think of a launch event, they think of a big speech, and a room full of people, and it's one moment in time, and all you have to do is show up and make sure that you don't stumble over your shoes while you're climbing to a podium. You give a good speech and then you're done. But in reality, there's a lot of complexities that go into this, and I like to break up campaign launches into two distinct phases. So there's a soft launch, and the soft launch precedes, maybe intuitively, the big announcement moment. And the soft launch is more of a period in time. It's where you start to let loose the word that you're running. You can start to leak out the idea that you're going to be a candidate for public office. You might have some public-facing collateral that gets released, like a website, like social media. You might have a couple of smaller events. You'll tell people that you're running and take feedback and test your message that you're going to be really producing and spreading out once you launch for real in the hard launch stage of the campaign. And it's an opportunity to build support. There's no set period of time that you have to be in this period for, but it's an opportunity to get out, capture support, solicit feedback from your community, and make sure that you are basically aligning the stars so that when it's time to hard launch, you've got that momentum and that excitement of people who want to see you run standing behind you, who are going to be ready to have your back when you get into the campaign arena. And then the hard launch. The hard launch is that moment. I think it's maybe a little dramatized from film and television, but at its core, the goal is to tell the community that you're living in, and tell the folks who are following you and who are paying attention to the election that you're stepping forward to be a candidate in the given election. You get to establish and introduce yourself and why you're running. It's an opportunity to generate momentum and in the form of not just energy, but also press and support. And it is, again, the opportunity to say, hey, we're doing this, join our team, jump on the boat, and let's get off and go ahead and win this thing. And so that is the goal, right? The goal of the campaign, soft and hard launch put together, is to position the campaign so that there are supporters in your corner, that you've gotten the most energy and momentum and support out of the event as possible. Hopefully you've gotten some press hits. Hopefully you've gotten some new supporters to understand who you are and why you're doing this. And now you're able to just go ahead and be a candidate. You can do the things that a candidate needs to be doing in order to have success in the campaign trail itself. Victoria, I think we have some questions that might have even come from that. So I want to kick it to you to kind of break down a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I think we can take the slides down and just
Yep.
get into the conversation about it. I mean, it's a big moment, to that you're preparing for. So those are the big picture goals. I think that makes sense, like that everyone would share those goals. Do you feel like as an individual candidate, do you need to have any more specific to you and your community goals on top of that, like, or just kind of stick to the big picture goals that every launch should have?
I think especially when it comes to the soft launch, it's an opportunity to start to build a network of people and in a really organized way. I think a lot of times there are candidates who are getting ready to launch and they've scheduled a big announcement and they're surprised when there are people who they know are going to be supportive of them aren't in the room or aren't even, they're caught off guard by the candidate having run in the first place. And so I think, especially in this sort of soft launch phase, it's an opportunity to get the candidates and their sort of existing network really organized, get into the community, ask questions. I think that's a huge piece of this puzzle. Ask questions about how your candidacy will be received by the stakeholders in your community. It helps make candidates better and more effective once they're further down the road because they've taken time to solicit feedback, not just how they'll be and if there's a demand for what you're potentially selling to your community, but also ask questions about the environment, ask questions about the political issues that motivate people who are really tuned in and paying attention. And I think if you do that and you take the time to really be thoughtful and bring people into your orbit in this period, when you announce and when in the moments immediately after, you'll find that you're a better candidate for doing it because you're able to touch very powerfully on the things that you know are motivating people to participate in the election that you're running for.
That makes sense. And speaking of communities, now that we kind of have critical mass here, folks want to drop in the chat where you're based. I think that'd be fun just to see who's in the room and what parts of the country we're all coming from. So if you're on the chat, feel free to do that as we get into the next piece here. Maybe someone's near you, who knows? And oh yeah, we got a Chicago person. I'm in Chicago. That's cool. So yeah, I'd love to hear, Jared. So what do you say? Like, are you kind of teasing the hard launch and the soft launch phase with people? Like, how do you kind of position that for people as you're in that soft launch phase?
Yeah, I think that there is a bit of a tease element to it, especially this is true of press or people who may be a little bit further out on the periphery. I think you can be totally candid with people who are sort of in the kitchen cabinet or in the inner ring of your orbit. You can tell them that you're running. You can ask for their support up front and say, listen, I'm planning on launching around this date and time, and there are a couple of things that I know need to happen to make this event a slam dunk. Here's how you can participate. And then there are in every community, I think in the country at every levels of government, folks who are very, very politically connected and love to be in the know. And they're the folks who, for better, or sometimes even for worse, but it can be taken advantage of, will amplify speculation. And when I've done campaign launches really well, it's by putting the candidate in a position where they're weighing in on issues. They're sort of whetting the appetite of people who are really following these elections closely. And you create sort of a fervor and buzz around a conversation really about your potential candidacy. And especially if you're really attuned to the issues, what you'll see is, I think, a demand for someone like you to run. And then when you do that correctly, you get to step in and sort of be the thing that is filling that demand. So whatever the issue is, right, it could be something related to the environment or something really local. And what you'll find is if you're talking about that issue, word will spread and people will say, you know what, that is important. We need someone to run for this office that talks about this issue. And then when you run, it's like, holy crap, this person knows exactly what I care about and they're stepping forward. Why aren't we supporting them already? And so that's I think the sort of whetting the appetite of the community teaser phase that has to happen in this office.
Okay, that's helpful. And then Taylor Ryan asked in the chat, how much money do you need to even start at this stage?
Not a whole lot. I mean, I think there are, when you're talking maybe higher levels of government and you're trying to run this, the question of budget, I think, is always different regardless of what level of government you're on. But at every stage in this campaign, everyone's just getting started and it's very nimble. So even if you're running for offices like U.S. Senate, I've done several U.S. Senate campaigns where we've launched campaigns to a lot of like fanfare and fervor, and it was a low budget thing. I mean, not every campaign has to spend a ton of money, let's say on a professionally produced launch video or rent out a ballroom. I think that's where at the hard launch stage things can start to accrue in terms of cost. But generally in the soft launch phase, it's just a lot of networking and forcing yourself out into the community, asking questions, weighing in on social media about the issues that you care about, and maybe even giving a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to a decision might be made about your candidacy. Again, it's almost like flirtatious within the community. Here's what I'm thinking about doing, and is this what you guys want?
Yeah, and I think there's actually just a really good question here too about what's the difference from Pamela. What's the difference in campaign kickoff versus an announcement? You know, like, and I think we're going to get into the announcing here soon in more detail, but just at this stage, you know, what's the difference?
I think if they're sometimes used synonymously. So a campaign kickout and a campaign announcement, the hard launch, I should say, is really the public facing opportunity where you're bringing people into a room or an outside venue or whatever it is. You're bringing people together to share with your friends, your family, but also people who are politically aware and who are maybe strangers to you that you're running for office. I've heard that called a campaign kickoff. I've heard it called a campaign announcement, but really it's synonymous. Now, that does not necessarily mean that you have to formally launch or formally like file your campaign the day that you hard launch. And in fact, most candidates will subtly initiate the beginning of their campaign, right? They're releasing a website that can be found online. They're weighing in on social media, but they're doing it with some subtlety so that they're not necessarily courting the attention that a candidate typically would, and that you have to do when you launch a campaign in the hard launch stage.
That's great. And I think one more question that I'd love to just get into the preparing for the launch, kind of the nuts and bolts there. But another question, the person's name isn't in there because they're on their phone, but it says, what community stakeholders do you suggest that we meet with first to express our intentions, get that soft launch buzz going?
It's a great question. And I think it's a question that is very dependent on the candidate too. Many candidates are actively involved in community groups. They are actively involved in maybe even online groups where they know people who are influential in their community. But I think more than anything, it's starting to talk to the people that you trust, who have your confidence and you have theirs, and express not just your intent to run, but again also your intent to solicit information. And say, hey, I'm really thinking about running for office, or I'm 99% sure I'm going to run, but I want to hear before I make any sort of hard decisions what you think about this. And if hopefully, right, the response will be, oh my God, absolutely, you'd be a fantastic candidate. How can we support you? Which lends into, hey, great, I'm planning on launching my campaign soon, and here's all the things that need to happen, and I'd love your support in this first big milestone of our campaign.
That's great. And we got a question from Instagram. This is on Instagram Live as well for folks who are on the Zoom. Just of when you should announce that you're running. I don't know if you want to table that question when we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of that, but
yeah. I think we will touch on it for sure in a little bit here, but the long and short of it is, I try not to rush candidates through the soft launch phase of this. And I think that it's natural to some extent when you're talking and sort of walking a mile in the candidate's shoes to lace them up even tighter and start running. But there are a lot of things, as you'll see in a moment here, that can really contribute effectively to make this sort of first public announcement as effective as it can possibly be. And when I've seen launches potentially even go awry is when there is sort of a in the moment feeling of urgency around launching a campaign. Like, hey, word gets out that someone so-and-so is running, and you think, oh my God, the whole world knows that I'm doing this now. I have to drop what I'm doing and sort of rush towards a launch event. When in reality, there's more often not times to do this right, to put your head down and set up the event so that you get the most out of it.
That's great. Okay. I think we should, yeah, pivot now into the preparing for the launch. Let's get tactical here. You know,
Yeah.
what do we need to do? Tell us.
So we've put a checklist together, and I'll share my screen again so we can look into it. And there's a lot that does go into it. Here, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. So like anything, right, there's components to making sure that everyone is marching to the beat of the same drum, and a campaign launch does require degrees of organization. This is throughout the soft and hard launch stage, but again, what we're leading up to is that moment where you're really announcing to the world and to your community that you're running for office. So a lot that goes into it includes courting the press, right? An effective campaign launch, one of the outputs of this is, have you gotten people who are writing about these elections or who are broadcasting about these elections to be aware of your candidacy? And what goes into that are things like press releases, which are tactics that we'll show you here in a moment about how our tools can help make that process, which may sound overwhelming, actually very straightforward and easy. We touched on the teaser content of it a little bit, but this is the opportunity to sort of tell a story about a decision that's going to be made that puts you in a position to sort of seize the spotlight when it's kind of heading over to you. The actual logistical prep of a launch event is really important. This is that moment where you're getting organized, you've picked a date, you are deciding whether or not you're going to be speaking in a venue. A lot of candidates prefer to sort of arrange a space, one that they can fill with friends and family. It doesn't have to be a 300-person ballroom. In fact, sometimes these smaller spaces are better, where it looks like you've got if you have 50 people, which is a lot for a launch event, but it looks like it's jam-packed and it's got a lot of energy. So the tone and what you're projecting out matters. It's always good to pick a venue that you think is going to position you so that there's a ton of rah-rah, a ton of excitement, and it looks like a packed house. A great best practice is to make the event not just about the candidate, but about the community and the narrative of why you're running. And one of the most effective ways to do that is to have someone on behalf of the community attest to why you're going to be a fantastic candidate. And this can be launched. This is one of those things that is really effectively done in the soft launch stage of this process, where you're talking to those friends and family or those influencers in the community, someone who is really well known. And one of the asks is, hey, would you give a sort of a precursor to my own sort of speech at this launch event, essentially nominating me on behalf of the community? Why do you think I'd be a great candidate? And if you're comfortable, can you say it to other people and help amplify my event by lending your voice and your name to it? There is generally a speech involved. It does not have to be a 15, 30, 45-minute speech. In fact, some of the best launch events that I've been a part of was 5 minutes and then sort of a mix and mingle and make the community feel like they're a part of it. And then what happens after, right? So on the day of the launch, or what happens during, on the day of the launch, there's a lot of different assets that you can line up to make it feel like a really tight, cohesive, and organized event. In addition to the actual event itself, there should be a lot of digital content that accompanies it. How are you launching your social media channels in earnest, right? There are tons of them that are out there. How are you using social media effectively across these different platforms to all of these different people who live on them, and let them know that you've made this decision? We recommend video. There's content that can be written to accompany it. We're going to show you all of that in a second. Email, really effective during the soft launch phase. We encourage people to, again, get organized, bring your community into it. On the day of the announcement, blast it out and let people know that you're doing this. If you weren't able to make it to the physical event, you've made the decision, you're running, get involved and get on the boat. And then again, launch videos, launch announcement content, all that stuff comes together to hopefully make a really tight, cohesive, and impactful event.
Yep, that's great. And I want to bring in something coming from the chat that maybe you want to comment on, because it's a little bit about the bridge from pre into preparing for the launch.
Yeah.
Jeremy said in the chat, don't forget to check how many signatures you need for ballot access and the deadline you need them by. Independents typically have higher signature counts than the party candidates. Additionally, I found that collecting those signatures can help connect with the community during the soft launch and refine and test your message. So do you want to kind of connect the dots of signature gathering up to this preparation for the launch?
Yeah, there are sort of two different schools of thought. I've tried both, and I think both are effective. And it, again, is a little dependent on the race. But In some races, you actually have the opportunity to collect the petitions during the soft launch period of your campaign, right? If you have, whether it's a month, 2 weeks, especially sort of in the off-peak hours and months of the campaign, where maybe folks aren't necessarily paying attention in March or April, kind of like where we are right now. If you're able to collect those petitions in time, you can actually launch the campaign, the hard launch, with the news that you've qualified for the ballot. And I love launching campaigns with announcements like that because you're good. You're on the ballot. You're marching straight to the general election. One, there's no uncertainty that there's a big barrier that you have to overcome right out of the gate. You've cleared it. And you're able to celebrate that accomplishment along with the news that you're officially running. So when possible, I recommend it. I think it's a really effective way to set your campaign up for success and also communicate viability. Is a big concern, I think, and it's a reasonable one for independents, is that the threshold to get on the ballot is so challenging and it is so high that it's potentially disappointing if you launch a campaign only to not be able to clear the signature threshold. So to the extent that you can, I think it's valuable to sort of marry soft launch and petition process together, and then marry the hard launch and the announcement that you made the ballot together. Those things generally are monumental, momentum generating events, and they should be combined for an even bigger impact if it's possible. There are other instances where, unfortunately, timing or the dynamics of the election make it a little bit more challenging, and you have to announce that you're running and then collect the signatures. And when done effectively, you can sort of spring into your petition drive using your hard launch. So you can name the challenge. You can say, listen, the first goal of this campaign is to get X signatures by Y date. We've got the people in this room who can help make that possible. Let's go ahead and get that done so that we have better news to announce by the date that the petitions are due. And if you've done the work to soft launch effectively and you're bringing people into your orbit, I think that makes the petition process even more tenable for candidates.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks for
Great
walking
question.
through either version. Yeah.
Good question, Jeremy.
Yeah. And yeah, let's go get into the kind of prep here a little bit more, so you're trying to find a space to do it in. Any hot tips there on like the types of spaces to consider, that tend to be in most communities that you could use?
Yeah, I have a soft spot for event spaces and venues that are directly related to the kind of candidate and the kind of campaign that you're running. So what I mean by that is places that are sentimental or that reinforce the why that is driving your decision to run, I think contribute to the story that you're trying to tell in a really powerful way. An obvious example are folks who maybe have served in the military, and there's a military implication if you're able to use, probably not a military base itself, but a place of significance in your community that is related to that. I know people who've launched campaigns where they graduated school or high school, at the site of businesses that they've been involved with, at the site of significance, of historical significance in their community. Athletes who've launched campaigns, at the place that they grew up playing sports, for example. Like there's a way to use the venue to contribute to the tone and to the narrative and to the why that's driving your decision to run. More generally, I think it's just important that the venue is thought out. It can accommodate the people and the purpose that you're trying to have. And it feels like it can contribute to momentum. The last thing you want is to, again, have like a ballroom of 400 people and everyone is in suit and ties, but it feels a little empty, but also like a little, where I'm looking for, like buttoned up. When really what you're trying to do is to generate an environment where there's excitement and enthusiasm and people are ready to run through a wall alongside you.
That makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like, just setting the tone for folks of what type of event it is. Because I liked what you were saying of like, how do you make it feel like a value add for the community? I mean, obviously the people who care about you are going to show up to show their support for you,
Yeah.
But to try to get that next layer of people out, maybe who, wouldn't do it just because you asked them to,
Yeah.
right there, how can you like position? I mean, one idea I just had in my head, but you probably have better ones, is like, okay, if I'm running on this major issue, can I position the event as, a way to gather people in X community who all care about, Y issue? But what
Yeah.
other ideas there?
So you touched on a really great point, which is if there is an issue that is motivating people to participate in an election, and you can reflect that, it's similar to the idea of communicating why I'm running. You can also communicate maybe contrast or the purpose behind your campaign and what the impact it will have on the community, which we'll get into kind of the content of the tactics that we discussed. But in a launch event, I think it's important to name that the goal, again, is to introduce yourself to the community, right? And in introducing yourself to your community, I think it's important to answer a very critical and core question, which is why am I running? And why should people in this community stand behind me and next to me? And implicit in that also is contrast, right? Because most people don't run for office if there's nothing of significance that's on there are no stakes that are significant to run. Otherwise, maybe you wouldn't, right? There's something important that's motivated you to make a major life decision that matters to more than just you. And how do you reflect and communicate that in all of the things that come together to make an effective launch? So to your point, Victoria, maybe there's something that needs to be funded in your community or a pond that hasn't been cleaned up. It's something that matters to people. Launching there has displays contrast. Like, why is this problem existing in our community? Whose job is it to fix it? And turns out that I'm stepping up to try and do that. I think that's a really effective tactic and something that, again, it's dependent on the candidate, it's dependent on the community. And then the last thing I would say about location, and I think it's important to dive into it, obviously, is that similar to the idea of, not being in a stuffy ballroom if you can avoid it, launches are supposed to be kind of like a party. So we've seen even candidates at Good Party in the past launch their campaigns in places like a public park. And they didn't treat it like a political event. It wasn't, hey, it's all about me, me, me. I'm going to give a speech and I'm going to have all of you guys listen to me and I'm going to have the reporters come and talk to me. But it was like a party. I'm going to be cooking up some food. I'm going to be bringing everyone together to a place that we all normally commune in. And I'm going to take 5 minutes of your time to tell you about a decision I made that I think can have a really important impact on all of our lives. I think when through that lens, it's a much more effective approach for the candidate, but also for the people who want to stand next to them.
Yeah, that's great. Taylor asked, I'm going to kind of include my own bit on this too. He asked, how do I find a campaign manager? But I think even just as we kind of look at this planning a campaign launch event, obviously, okay, there's some event planning, there's lists you got to make, there's prep you've got to do. And, some of us love that stuff. We're the kind of people who throw events all the time, no big deal. Others of us don't do that very often. That's not our core strength. So how do you handle the organizing of the launch? And then, also this kind of campaign manager question might fit into that, or maybe you want to address that separately.
Yeah, I think whether or not you have sort of a full team that maybe has come together during that soft launch stage of the campaign, it's such a nimble and young time in a campaign, and the opportunity to participate in this sort of launch event is something that really does motivate people who aren't necessarily full-time with the campaign. That it's a really great opportunity to plug in people and put them in positions where they can obviously contribute, but contribute in ways that they're really comfortable. Because sometimes political volunteering, if you're asking people to do sort of the traditional political actions like going door to door or knocking, making phone calls, can be a little tough. But planning a party is something that is a little off the beaten path that people might like to do, and attending one, I think a lot of people like to do. So it's a really great opportunity to utilize volunteers, great opportunity to put people in a position where they can make a meaningful impact on the campaign. And no matter how many staff you have on the campaign that is your building, I think you can never have enough people who want the baton in their hand and saying, I can do this, and this is what I'm good at. Please put me in a position where I can. I think the campaign manager question is a little bit separate. Finding a campaign manager and bringing someone in sometimes is almost a little early at this stage in the race. Again, I think it depends a little bit on budget, right? If you're bringing in full-time people or part-time people who are being paid to support your campaign. Finding them is something that I don't know if there's an art and science for. There are plenty of different networks out there. A lot of young, hungry people who have come up the rung of political campaigns who are looking for their opportunity to get involved in races that they care about. But most importantly, we're building tools and tech that help absorb some of that responsibility. And we'll show you here in a moment that even if you don't have a full-time campaign manager, the purpose of what we're building is to help candidates who are running that way, who are running with the support of good people who are volunteers, who might be new to the political space and want to be able to produce the kind of launch events that we're talking about, that have never done it before. Well, we're trying to take away the idea that it can't be done. And in fact, a lot of these outputs are fairly straightforward, and we have a lot of ideas and tools that we've built on how to make it possible.
Yeah, that's great. I think we'll segue into that. I think the only thing I'll add here, since my expertise is less in running campaigns and more in movement building and other areas, but I think it is a really great opportunity to make little asks, as you prepare to launch your campaign that can hopefully lead to bigger asks of the people around you, whether that's to play a role in the campaign, who you'll then call someone who's on your team, on your staff, or even it's just like, hey, can you bring the blah 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 little thing to the event? That would be such a huge help for me if you could just take care of that. And they go, oh yeah, no problem. That's so easy, right? You just want me to bring, some drinks or some food or, something that I can provide. And then once they do that, then you can make the next ask and really play to that person's strengths. So I think just consider this early time is the perfect time to kind of feed in those really little asks that will show you who's really going to show up for you and who you can hopefully make bigger asks of down the line. But yeah, let's segue here too into the next stage of, okay, I'm getting this event together, I'm doing the event planning pieces. What am I going to say? And both, what am I going to say? I'd be interested in like how I talk about this event is one piece, right? Like how am I positioning it? Any tips there? And then what am I saying at the event? How do I craft and deliver a really compelling message that's going to really kick this event off well?
Yeah. So the pre-event stuff, I think, is very much that a combination of the sort of teaser language, like, hey, we're trying to get people excited about attending something. We have to be a little bit coy because we don't want word to totally escape about what we're doing. But there is going to be an announcement made, hopefully at this point, right? You've decided to launch, you've decided that the stars have aligned. You'll know that the stars have aligned when you see people and you're hearing back from people that, yes, you have to do this, right? You've taken the time to get out into your community. You've maybe already decided to run, but like I said, you're 99% of the way there. And you are communicating to folks that, yes, I'm doing this and I want to hear what you have to say about it. And the feedback has been overwhelming. You have to run, and you're talking about, or we need people who are talking about and embody the values that you have for our community. And then you get to go back to those folks and say, you know what, we've made a decision. I think you're going to like the answer. And stay tuned because we have this event coming up. We'd love if you can attend. If not, we'd love if you can amplify it in other ways on this date, in this time.
So you don't say like, come to my campaign launch event. It sounds like you're just like, come to a thing. Is that kind of your approach here?
I think with the exception of really close friends and family, right? And with the people that you want in the room, because I don't think you can say, hey, I'm launching my campaign, be here in 15 minutes. So there is obviously some coordination with people that you are letting in the know on, especially those who've been involved in planning the event, that, hey, I'm going to be here. Hey, this is the date. This is the time. Let's make sure we're back in the room. And then there are some tools, and I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen a little bit here, that you can use to amplify that and to make sure that you are setting yourself up for success. So like we had shown, and I'm showing everyone a peek under the hood of our AI campaign content manager, which has a lot of very specific outputs for a political launch event. And that includes press releases, a very tried and tested tactic by which you can sort of court the press and encourage them to write about your launch event, as well as what you might say at the event in the form of a launch speech. A launch video, which is an opportunity to use social media to make the announcement. Emails to those supporters. This is what, Victoria, I'm talking about, trying to let people know, hey, I'm running for office. I'm launching my campaign. Let's do this. as well as some copy for social media, all of which we'd encourage candidates to get into the habit of using the whole suite, right? These are all different pieces of the puzzle, and when combined, they can be really potent in generating momentum for your campaign. One of the things that I think has been used to great effect already by our candidates, but also is something that really helps pack the room, is this press release. And for those who maybe aren't familiar, right, the press release is essentially a big announcement, a PR blast that you're sending to journalists who you're hoping will take the baton and write a story about your campaign. And then in doing so, attend your event, drive traffic to your event, amplify to people who maybe don't know you personally that you're running for office, and here's the details of your launch event. And so there are two types. It's a little in the weeds, but I think there's nothing that stops anyone from doing this except for not necessarily knowing it. There are a press release that exists called an embargoed press release. This is something I've done to great effect in campaigns in the past. And I'll show you what the distinction is between that and sort of a regular press release. So an embargoed press release essentially is something that you're giving an advance copy to, giving early notice to people who are influential in the community and who potentially could broadcast or write about your campaign. Let's say you are in a town of with 3 big news stations, right? And you want all 3 to cover your campaign, but there's one in particular that would have the biggest impact if they bit and wrote a story or had a segment on the evening news that you launched your campaign. You can feed them what's called an embargoed press release. So let's say I'm launching my campaign at noon Eastern time on September 9th. I would feed this press release on like September 7th under embargo. So the recipient is not ethically is bound to not release the news or write a story about this until the date that the embargo is lifted. And in doing that, oftentimes journalists will reach out to the candidates in that period of time in between. So on September 7th, September 8th, this journalist is going to you saying, hey, you're running for office. This is exciting. I have some questions for you for a story that I can write that will be released on the day that you announce your campaign, which ensures that you're getting press, right? Which is a huge, huge output of the campaign launch. That journalist will presumably come to your launch event, and you've now achieved one of the big goals right out of the gate of how do I get the press to pay attention to my launch event? One of the biggest and most consistent, I think, gripes that I hear from candidates are the press isn't paying attention to my campaign. And I will tell you, more often than not, it's not out of sort of malicious intent. It's because the press didn't necessarily know there was an event happening. And I think it's easy when you're a candidate to think, you know, I'm deep in this. People are going to take this with the seriousness and with the same intensity that I have. But a lot of times that just isn't the case. And the best way to get noticed is to put yourself out there proactively. So this is a tool that will do that. We've seen candidates in the past follow this recipe and get press that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten, and seen real results come out of it. This is an embargoed release. It goes out, you get press. Everybody's feeling great. But how do you tell everybody else that you're running? Well, right around at the, let's say the morning of, you're announcing your campaign. It's the exact same press release as the one that was under embargo. You immediately release it, and now all of a sudden the news is out. You're running for office, and then a few hours later you have the launch event. But now that you've released the news, you're now directing people in the press release. You'll say, hey, we're having a launch event at, let's say, 2 o'clock Eastern time, 3 o'clock Eastern time. People are coming to the event. The news has gotten out. The press has already bidded it. And you're set up for success because now you've got friends and family in the room. You've got potentially journalists and reporters in the room. And you also have people who read the story and wanted to see what this candidate's about in the room. In coordination with all of that stuff is when you can start releasing a launch video, right around the time that your press release comes out. This is a video that was written, or video script that was written entirely by the AI that I would presumably film. And right around the time the press release goes out, straight to camera. Doesn't have to be a heavily produced press release. It could be as simple as something shot on your phone. In fact, sometimes that's the most effective. You in your kitchen saying, hey, it's the morning of my launch event. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm doing this and what the stakes are. We also have social media copy, and included in this, in the launch, when you go into our platform and hit launch social media copy, you can even tell it to do some of the teaser content that is important to sort of set the tone for your big event. So here you're looking at five distinct pieces of social copy, right? That you could go on your campaign's social media accounts, two of which are that teaser copy. Hey, I'm not announcing anything, but I'm trying to set the tone about why this is really important and what I'm doing. And then when it's time to announce, you have your official launch announcement social media copy. The same is true of your speech. All of this stuff can be written and it can be generated in our AI tool. And that way, the candidates save themselves a lot of time and stress trying to think through, oh my God, what am I going to say? How am I going to tell the press I'm running? Who's going to be responsible for writing my social media posts? What do I say in a video? All you have to do is go into this button and find the option that pertains to what it is you're trying to do. Social media copy, launch email to your supporters, a press release, and you can tell it, hey, make sure that it's launching my campaign. All of this stuff can be done in our tool, and I think it's a really effective way to put the guardrails on candidates to understand how to effectively launch a campaign.
Yeah, no, thanks for showing all this. And I'll just plug, Eric said in the chat, the tools save a lot of time. You can reword or reshape to fit your needs, but a majority of the work is done by the AI. Did I say I love it? Consultants and campaign managers want to do much of a lot of this work, basically. So thank you, Eric. We really appreciate the shout out. Yeah, I have a bunch of questions I've been kind of capturing in the chat, so I want to pull a lot of these in. Thank you everyone for all the participation in there. I'll actually just ask this one that just came in because it's relevant to seeing what's on the screen, and then we'll get into really some messaging related questions. Jeremy was just asking, does this have translation, language support?
It's a good question, Jeremy. We've experimented with it. I think that the AI can produce some content in languages other than English. I think that the thing I would highly encourage, no matter what the language is to have at least a professional speaker review any content that you're producing, not just in our AI tool, but through Google Translate or anything like that before you distribute it. Because I think whether it is Google Translate or the AI, sometimes if you don't speak the language, you might be saying something that is not exactly perfect or even just natural to someone who speaks the language fluently. So the short answer is, yeah, we've experimented and seen some good results in using the AI to produce content in another language. But more than anything, it's always important to gut check it and make sure that it passes the smell test for someone who speaks the language natively.
Yeah, and at least you're doing some of the heavy lifting of just saying, hey, can you review this versus can you translate this whole thing for me, which is a much more intensive ask to make of anybody.
That's right.
That's good. And, I guess one question is just what shouldn't you do with messaging? Are there any yeah, don't do that or stay away from, focusing your message around these types of things? Like what should the focus be and what should you avoid doing with your messaging?
Yeah, I think the focus is always on communicating the story of the campaign. So why am I doing this, and where is the contrast between not necessarily you or your opponent, but the themes of the campaign. So for those who have spoken to us before at Good Party, or have even experimented with our tool and really dove in deeply, I think what you'll find is there's a theme of elections are about a choice. And for a lot of candidates who are running as independents and running and challenging the two-party system head on, that choice has something to do with change, the theme of change, right? Because very often the office holder in our system happens to be a partisan candidate or a Democrat or Republican candidate or even an establishment candidate. And to run the way that we're helping candidates run, you have to have a little bit of anti-establishment in you. And so when we talk about themes and why you're running, leaning into the choice that you're asking voters to ultimately make, I think is really powerful and really important. Why are you the best choice? What is the contrast between you and the environment that you're hoping to change? I think that's all fair game. It's all good. Where I think that there are things to avoid is to insert negativity, a ton of negativity into what is supposed to be an uplifting and positive and momentum generating event. I've seen candidates sometimes even kind of go off the rail when, and as a staffer, there's always that moment where you're kind of putting your palm in the hand saying, oh, why did they have to go off the grid? but talking and getting maybe a little bit into the weeds on something personal about your opponent, I think generally doesn't sit well, because the event ultimately is supposed to be about us and the candidate, and the vision for change that's positive and uplifting. And if it becomes a little bit more negative, I think that it can dampen the tone of enthusiasm and excitement that you're trying to get out of the campaign.
Yeah, so it makes sense. It sounds like you have to, since you're trying to change something, otherwise you wouldn't be running. You can create some contrast, but obviously don't end on that note, or
Yeah.
stay there too long. Because whether it's an incumbent you're facing, or just an opponent in a fresh election where you're both up, then yeah, it seems like those dynamics, you just don't want to get stuck there as you work
Yeah.
on your messaging. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes contrast and negativity, or contrast and opposition, might get conflated. And to me, they're different, even if it's subtle. So contrast hopefully should be motivating, right? Change is contrast, and hopefully that change is uplifting and encouraging. And where you can sort of veer into negativity is if you are casting blame, or attacking character of somebody else. Even sometimes there have been campaigns where the character of someone that you're running against, who currently holds the office, is in question. Like they've been in the news for some bad reasons. I've still seen candidates who are sort of trying to paint themselves as the uplifting challenger to that person of maybe dubious character, or morally suspect character, fall flat on their face, because it's like that contrast isn't seen anymore, right? You're calling out somebody, and you're trying to be the uplifting person, but it creates confusion. I would just encourage people to say, look, contrast is totally fair game, but you don't need to veer into sort of negativity, or character of your opponent.
Well, that connects actually perfectly to a question Hector asked a lot earlier, and I've been saving, of just how do you approach a quote unquote muddled past? He said things like a DUI from 10 plus years ago,
Right.
the old news that sometimes resurfaces in these moments. So do you address it? Do you not address it? And back to your press moment, right? Like, what if they
Yeah.
ask you?
No, I don't think you have to. I think that you are trying to use this moment to paint a tone for yourself, and that tone will hopefully be consistent throughout the campaign, right? And I think that if you are a candidate, and there might be some exceptions to this, I think that, again, every race has its own unique quirks and qualities that have to play into this equation. But if you're a candidate who comes out of the gate, throwing punches, it sets a tone that might not be so positive and uplifting. Even if sometimes you feel like a punch has to be thrown because there's something that is so maybe offensive to you that you have to call out. I think that it's important to say, look, here's why I'm running. Here's the change, or the theme of our election, and the contrast between, or the contrast that has motivated me to run. There are ways that you can sort of subtly touch on things that are maybe better left unsaid, but I don't think you need to go in and say, and I'm running because my opponent did this thing that we all know is really bad. I think there are ways to be more artful about it.
Yeah, and just to I have one follow-up on that, and then another question related. For, I think in this case of, something from the past, do you want to just say okay, if someone asks you point blank, about hey, I heard in this, I'll just use the example given, you had a DUI 10 years ago or something like that. How do you recommend people respond?
If someone's asking about something in your past?
Yeah, if they're directly asking you, you can't position yourself away from it, basically, because they're just asking.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this is something, honestly, that needs to be addressed in that soft launch period, and even potentially before, when you're getting closer personally to the decision of whether or not you should run for office. And I've seen that, and I think I'm seeing in the chat Hector talking about something that I think I would agree with and address, which is, if there's something that you think about yourself is potentially a liability, sometimes it is better to name it. And in fact, a lot of people, and I think it's human nature to want to accept people for their flaws, and be forgiving and move on. And I've seen in the past candidates say, look, I've got things that I've done, and things that I'm not proud about, or things that were important to shaping who I am today. that I need to provide the proper context for. And in fact, in some instances, that has inspired them to run for office. Like the decisions that we make shape us, and like anything else, sometimes it's important to name it and do so in a way that's authentic. And I do want to name something, Tom, that you had said in the chat, which I think is important. We talk about painting a picture or illustrating or communicating things, and it might sound political speak. You'll have to forgive me, that is a little bit of the world I come from, though now I'm a big time tech guy. Uh, but the thing that I would encourage every candidate to take at heart, and this is true of a launch event, it's true of a campaign for sure, in every aspect of how you communicate to people internally and also especially externally, is that authenticity is the thing that I think is the most powerful a value that you can communicate. And I think also it's the thing that people can see right through if you're being inauthentic. So I would never encourage candidates to paint or to illustrate themselves in a way that they can't stand behind and that they don't feel is true to who they are. I think when you launch, it's an opportunity to be yourself and to showcase what makes you a special choice and a good choice for your community. And it's an opportunity to allow people to see that authenticity and let it speak for itself, for sure. So we would never, ever encourage candidates to, whether it's using the AI or even just in their own work, produce and release something that they feel isn't authentic to who they are.
That's helpful. And then there were some lots of positive reinforcement of that happening in the chat. Love that. I think two other things, and then I want to get into the next stage here. So you mentioned earlier, kind of prepping someone in your circle, community mover and shaker, to be someone who will also be messaging at your launch event. How do you prep them to message? And I think this, I might just actually kind of connect another quick question here too from Jeremy about, like, is there a way to give other people who are working on our campaign with us access to this platform so they can play with the messaging and information and, with the AI to help craft messages that are on message that you've set as the candidate. So yeah, how do you prep people who might be speaking at this event, speaking on your behalf? How, is there a way to bring them into the tool even to help you do that?
Yeah. The easy answer, I think there are two parts to the question, and I think I might start with the second part because it's just more straightforward, is that we're actively working on being able to create different sort of logins or affiliated accounts in our tool for users who may not be candidates, staff or volunteers who are really closely affiliated with the campaign and want to use this content. We want to make these tools obviously available to not just candidates, but the people in their orbit who want to be really helpful and supportive. The way to do it right now is to use one credential and account. So if you're comfortable, we have one login that's synced to the entire campaign. And when we have these sort of user-specific accounts, which I know our team on the product side is working on very diligently, we'll be able to share that update to everyone in this chat who's using the tool so that you can start bringing in staffers into your orbit with a unique account of their own. So it's a good question. It's something we've heard feedback from other candidates, and something that is in the near-term view for our product. The question of, and I think this was the question, Victoria, you may have to restate it if I get it wrong.
Yeah, just how do you prep other people who might be messaging on your behalf? I mean, back to authenticity too. Should you prep them? I mean, or just let them speak from the heart about why they think you would be a good candidate and representative of their community?
It's a delicate balance, I think. I generally would lean towards letting the person, at the very least, take a first stab at what they want to say. You don't want to put a constraint on someone who especially knows you really well. I've seen, in fact, and in some ways, even saying it out loud, it's almost very similar to giving a toast at a wedding, right? You don't want to be overly looking over the shoulder of the person who's trying to do you something really meaningful and do you be supportive of a decision or something impactful in your life. So I think the approach that makes sense and that I'd recommend is give people the freedom to, and the trust and the confidence, right, to be supportive of you in the way that they know how. And I think what you'll find is that parts of your personality that maybe you wouldn't even share, or experiences or stories that reinforce why you're running and why you would be a great candidate will come out that way. I think it's important, and this could be the neurotic campaign manager in me, but I like to see what's being said about the campaign before it goes out. People mean well. You always want to make sure that you are not caught off guard if someone says something that might be embarrassing or even well-intentioned that you weren't expecting. So I think it's important that the candidate knows what's going to be said, but not that they're, taking a pen to what was written.
Got it. That's helpful. And then we had a couple, these were earlier in the chat too, and then we can get to the day of the event, which is this next piece, and how to maximize that opportunity. But we heard from Tom saying, hey, our campaign launch event's really necessary. I gained significant support without leaving my home office, got about 10,000 votes last cycle without spending any money or any events. And then Eric also brought up my soft launch was running soft and under the radar until my site went up and my social media was established. Friends and family and close associates blew it up into a hard launch. I was working to stay under the radar, but the incumbent and her team have gotten word and are now playing chess with me, right? So, in this stage before the day, do you really need to do it? Is there a case to not do it? And then how do you prevent it from getting away from you before you get to the day?
Those are two related and good questions. Let's answer again the sort of the shorter and concise one first, which is, I think that every campaign should have a moment where they're sharing the news that they're running for office. That is what I would define as a hard launch, is you making the decision not just to run, but to tell other people who maybe aren't friends and family, right? That you're running for office, and telling to your community why you're doing this and why you want to serve them. Launches, I believe, come in all different shapes and sizes. I think there are some best practices that can really make sure that you get the most out of this one opportunity per campaign, at least, to be able to do that. But absolutely, I think that there are ways that you can have an effective launch without necessarily having a big sort of blitzy event. A video is great. Being able to send an email and letting people know is great. But more than anything, I think it's important that launch events are coordinated, right? Because the last thing that you want is someone coming to you who you respect and who you know saying, oh my God, I had no idea you were running for office. And that is, to me, an indicator that a launch was not as successful as it could have been if people that you intuitively would have thought are running and people who are in your orbit aren't aware that you're doing this. So whether it's having an event, sending out a video, sending out a press release and doing interviews, building and launching your social media, or all of the above, I think it's important that there are at least a few different elements associated, because people are plugged into their communities in different ways. And again, the last thing you want is to be having conversations with people who you know are plugged in, who aren't aware that you're running for office. The other question of I was planning a soft launch and the word kind of leaked is a situation that I've seen before, and I think there might even be an opportunity to talk more in a separate setting, one-on-one later, to dive deeper into it. But what I will tell you is that I found that more often than not, the feeling of urgency because people are starting to talk might inspire a hard launch, when in reality, that feeling is not as pervasive of oh my God, the word is out and I'm running, as you might feel. And this is true not just of launches, but for candidates, it's very easy to get sucked into the campaign, right? You're putting a ton of your time, ton of emotional energy, ton of potentially resource in all of its different shapes and sizes, time, energy, maybe investing some of your own money into jumpstarting the campaign. You're asking a lot of things of other people. It's very easy to get sucked into this and to see any issue or any situation that comes across your attention as outsized when maybe other people don't see it that way. So, of course, I don't know the unique circumstance of your particular sort of soft to hard involuntary launch, but I'd be willing to bet that there are folks out there who, again, aren't necessarily aware that you're running if you haven't made this sort of hard announcement. And I wouldn't necessarily take the idea that you, unless you've already made the announcement, right, that you're somehow not able to launch on your terms just because your opponent even knows. In fact, a lot of times political opponents, especially incumbents, their tactic, their first instinct when someone else runs for office against them is to ignore them and to not give them any daylight. So even if they're playing sort of under the scenes, behind the scenes, insider baseball, chess with you, I think what you'll find is that a lot of people aren't interested or tuned into the insider games that candidates play, and you still have some plenty of room to launch a campaign on your terms if obviously the situation lends itself to that opportunity. But again, like anyone on this call, we're happy to talk about unique circumstances individually. Make sure that we can help all of you. If you're ready to launch a campaign, do it on your terms and do it in a way where you'll get the most out of the experience.
Yep, that's great. And I think, and I'm capturing, by the way, a lot of good questions in the chat. I'm going to save some of the general questions for the end as we kind of finish going through the launch questions here and the sequence. So, the next piece of this is, what about the day of the event? What are your tips and tricks for making sure it goes off without a hitch? Make sure you can kind of plan for unforeseen challenges. How do we go about that?
I think preparation is the big thing. Right. And so I think our AI tool, to give it another plug here, is really great at helping candidates get organized and get prepared. I think that there are checklists and resources that we have in our campaign under the resources library of our campaign tool that will help you sort of visualize all of the things that you might want to consider for a campaign launch, and then just checking them off the list, especially if they're done through the AI. But a lot of stuff that happens on the day of the launch is really just an exercise in executing on the things that you've been planning. So if it's releasing a video, it's hopefully maybe you've shot it already, maybe you're doing it live to camera, whatever it is, just giving yourself time to get comfortable, to get prepared, to get practiced on what you might say, and also to make sure that you've gone through your list and that everything that needs to be accounted for is right. It's totally different from other events or apolitical sort of activities that you may have planned in your past. And ultimately, it's just an exercise in doing the things that you set out to do.
Yeah, and before I lose this note too from earlier, there was a great tip from Eric, and thanks for everyone who's putting tips in the chat of if you're recording a video, you can download an app called Teleprompter. There are other apps like it where you can write up what you're going to say, and it'll just literally put it on your screen. So when you're recording with your phone facing you, you can see everything you need to say. And that way it looks like you're looking at the camera, which is super helpful. So just wanted to shout out all the great tips that are coming. And this is part of why we've launched this candidate community and are bringing candidates together, because so many good ideas are getting passed around in the chat. And that's just like the tip of the iceberg. But let's get into some of the challenges that could arise on the day. I mean, this is the question that came to mind for me. What do I do if something bad happens or tragic happens in my community, like right before the day of the launch is supposed to happen, or something happens, in my life, right? Like, should I postpone it? What should I say something, right? Because we can't predict, obviously, these things, that could come up. So
for sure. I think that there are circumstances, I think the more obvious one, right, is a circumstance where the community is broadly impacted. They happen, unfortunately. It could be all different sort of situations and events, but I don't think it would be advisable to launch a campaign when the attention of the community is very justifiably not interested in hearing from you today. And that doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, right? If something tragic happens, or even something just is sucking the oxygen out of the room, you're not doing yourself any favors, and the community is not going to be overly interested in hearing from you either, because their attention's just elsewhere. So again, like, if you think about what the core outputs are of a campaign launch, it's to build excitement and momentum and hopefully some awareness about your campaign. If all three of those things are not possible because of an unforeseen circumstance, I think it's absolutely fair game to be really forthcoming and just say, listen, we had planned an event, something out of control happened, right? And we're postponing the launch until a time that's more appropriate. I think that's totally reasonable. And in fact, I think that I just know for sure you're setting yourself up to have a more effective launch rather than trying to force it through a situation where, people's attention, even if they're there, is elsewhere. In the personal circumstance, I think that it's a little bit more variable. I think that it depends obviously on your ability to be present and to be able to launch a campaign, because again, this is a moment that should be a celebratory, exciting, uplifting sort of experience for you too, right? Especially if you're running for the first time, you want to be able to look back on this with nothing but good feelings. And if something has happened where you feel like you can't execute to the best of your ability, I think that's a conversation that can be had, saying, hey, are we putting ourselves in a position to have the most effective launch in light of what's happened to a candidate or someone in their family, whatever it is. And I think that it's totally reasonable to say, under these circumstances, we need to make a sort of last minute adjustment.
Got it. That's helpful. And then Jeremy asked, and maybe you can repeat some of what you said earlier, but also just tie this into the day of the event. How would you recommend reaching out to the press? As far as tip emails, should you be looking for specific reporters? Should you be inviting them to
Great
come?
question.
Yeah.
Great question. And this will be something that we've actually been experimenting with on the AI side of the tool too, which is not just what is the content of the press release, but who should it be sent to? So this is a very tactical question. I think it's a really important question because, for example, if you're running for, let's say you're running for local office, and you send a press release to a national political reporter at the New York Times, or even in your local community, you send it to the Metro news editor or the sports editor. I think it's unlikely that you're going to get the same reaction as the politics person. So the short answer is especially in the media field and in the traditional news industry, right? A lot of the contact information for reporters is actually public because that's how they source information from people. And so if you have a specific outlet that you're interested in, I would look for whoever writes political articles. Sometimes they have it in their contact section or their sort of staff bylines, and look for whoever writes about politics and then include them on the email that either receives the blast press release that you would send out to the press, or even the embargoed press release. And I think I know that was a little in the weeds. I think it's an important tactic, but a little dry, admittedly. But I think the more people that you can have one-on-one interactions with in the press, the better. And so that's why I personally love that embargoed release, because what you're doing, right? I know embargo sounds like a sort of a very political word, and it might be, but essentially what you're saying is, I want to give you a sneak peek about an announcement that I'm making. And I want to give you as a journalist the opportunity to have an exclusive on a decision that I'm making that is going to be newsworthy. And you're inviting them in, you're courting them, you're saying, I'm giving you time to write a story, because the alternative is you just announce something and now they're scrambling to pick up the pieces. So I think that if you send a press release under embargo, and the importance of embargoing it means that they can't sort of distribute your news before you're ready to make it, is that you are building a relationship with a reporter, you're giving yourself the opportunity to get press. And to answer your question of if that means the journalists will come, oftentimes they will. If they're writing a story about your campaign and you've given them some time, especially to be interviewed for the story, then oftentimes they will show up and they'll want to write maybe a follow-up story. So again, I know it might sound like very, very political and tactical, but the sort of press release package, the embargo and then the live release, I think is an important distinction. And when paired together, you're setting yourself up for results for sure.
And anything else you would add on for the day of? And then I want to get to the after the launch, and then we got lots of good questions that are general questions that have been coming in. What should you be trying to capture of this event? Any tips, like photos, collateral, like what's just going to be useful later on that you should, get your friend who's good at taking photos or whatever to make sure, or get a photographer or whatever you want.
Yes, this is something that it's a great question. And again, think through the lens of a launch of how am I setting my campaign up for success throughout the course of the campaign? What do I need? I want people who are there to be able to see that I did this and to be able to experience it with me. And later, I want to be able to memorialize it and use some of the content that I've produced, whether it's the speech, the pictures, just the storytelling, again and again and again. So I absolutely, the event, there should be, it doesn't have to be, again, professional people, but having friends take pictures or recording video. I think people do it anyway now. Like, I think oftentimes we'll just see people snap pictures or take their phones out and start recording whenever you're doing something like this. But making sure that you have someone who is responsible, who you can get it from later, that's there, that can take this content so you can use it, I think is super important. And yeah, just treating it. I think if the broader question is sort of what else do I need to do to make the most out of it? Honestly, more than anything is just remember that this is something that's supposed to be celebrated and that you should be enjoying. Like, it can be stressful, 100%. Some things that might feel major might get overlooked, and oftentimes they turn out to be minor, a little lapses. But a candidate who's really like a bundle of nerves, there's some extent to which that's it's impossible to maybe shake, but try to enjoy it. Try to put yourself in a position where you're having fun, where you're inviting people to have fun with you. And I think what you'll find is the experience is, it's fulfilling in that way, and you look back on it hopefully as a high point of the campaign. Even if you win, right? Like, if you win, the launch should still be one of the high points.
The quick metaphor that's coming to mind as you say that, because you mentioned like the wedding speech earlier, it's like this is like the engagement where there's like the secret and like, oh, someone's gonna propose, oh my god, there's like planning and da 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 da, and then like, oh my god, it's happening, and you're celebrating, but you still gotta make it to the wedding day and have it go well. It's a bigger event to plan and takes more time. So
there's definitely a metaphor of like, no matter what you do, there's always going to be something silly that happens that goes wrong. As long as you're able to have fun with it and hopefully have a good attitude, I think that's going to come through and it's going to make it a more memorable experience.
And then what should the call to action be at the day of the launch? And then how does that carry? Let's make that be the transition into how do you maintain the momentum after, after the launch?
Great question. And in fact, this is something we've worked really hard with the AI in particular at Goodparty to build into all of the launch content, right? So you're making an announcement, and I'm gonna beat this drum until we get off the phone. The goal is to build momentum and support and awareness for your campaign, right? And so people who are at the event, people who are seeing an email from you or reading a story as a result of a press release that you pitched, or who are going to your social media page for the first time and following you. The goal is to just bring people into the orbit. So the call to action is generally sign up in all of its various different forms, whether it's on social, following, if it's on the website, signing up to volunteer or signing up to get more information about the campaign. But one of the products of the launch is that you're not just building awareness, but you're growing your network. You're bringing people into your campaign around this big announcement that you're making. And so I think that making sure that that's accounted for and that you have a place in particular to send these people, whether it's a website or social media channels, even a donate page if you're using the event to try and raise some grassroots dollars right off the bat. All that stuff can be set up in the soft launch. It should be set up during that period where you have the opportunity to be thoughtful and deliberative and checking items off of your list. And then the day of the campaign, it's driving people to this place and encouraging them to learn more and sign up for this experience that you're about to embark on.
Yeah, that sounds like invite them on the journey with you. Let's make it an experience together, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yep. And then we got a ton of great questions that are more general. I think we've got just the right amount of time to work through them here. I'm going to start with some of the broader questions that I think will be applicable to more people, and then I'm going to get to some of the more specific questions as well. And before we dive in, just want to say thank you, Jared, for all the great insights so far. And the goal is to just keep this kind of programming going, so that we can support you and give you all the ideas and you know, in a little bit here before everyone goes, I'm gonna put a poll up actually to make sure we're on the right platforms for this candidate community in addition to Discord. So we want to know where you would connect if you're not in Discord. And so some questions here. I think a really good general question to start here from Eric is, what moves people to the polls the most? Is it canvassing, mailers, calls, texts, signs, meet and greets, or all of them? And, you know, I think that does segue from that. You're launching, you know, the launch event, right? Like, what are you kind of going to do next, right? And what's going to make the difference here?
So that is a great question. And one of the things that I love to do immediately after launch, and even in anticipation of a launch campaign, is, and I think it depends on the campaign too, but what are the activities essentially? The question is, what are the activities that will help us take this now newfound momentum that has been built as a result of this announcement and stretch it even further and build in more momentum and more awareness? And I think one of the ways to do that is by hosting smaller events or attending smaller events, but just really taking the time immediately after the launch, whether it's a week or a couple of days, to be hyperactive essentially on all the different platforms. So you're on social, you're taking pictures of yourself at events, right? Or you're being seen at other events. You're maybe hosting on other events. You are going door to door and canvassing to introduce yourself to people as newly launched candidate, you know, person running for office. You're soliciting even more feedback now that you've made the decision. You're making a concerted effort to get out into the community and not just say, here's why I'm running, but what do you think about the state of affairs now that I'm a candidate? Like how can this campaign best serve you? So I think that that can be built in during the soft launch period, is not just the day of the launch, but thinking through what are the opportunities to extend this momentum and to take the opportunity that we've created for ourselves and really capitalize on it. And it can be all of the above. Like get the core message there is just get out. You know, you're a candidate now. You've created a platform for yourself to be able to get out into your community. You absolutely should seize it and be the best candidate you can be, not just immediately after the launch, but throughout the course of the campaign. And specifically, the question I think is a tactical one, right? What moves people to the polls? Is it knocking on doors? Is it receiving a message? Is it a piece of mail? Seeing you on a video? It's a good question. I think like a lot of things, it depends on the campaign. But I think what we're talking about, if you take all of those things together, is how does a campaign generate awareness? And I think the thing that motivates people to the polls is not if they've received a postcard or if they've met a candidate, you know, any old candidate who showed up at their door. But I think the thing that motivates people to vote is, do they feel a connection to the campaign? And going back to the theme of authenticity, do they see, in a way, themselves reflected in the values of this person who is asking for the position of leadership in their community? And whether that is communicated through a conversation or through an advertisement, you know, I think less and less these days, but there were times where candidates were motivating people through videos that you saw on TV, or through conversations that are happening digitally. The thing is mostly, can you establish a connection with people? And are they aware, importantly, that there's an election happening? Because unfortunately, too often, folks don't necessarily know that elections are happening until they've already passed. So I think the thing that motivates people is the awareness of the candidate and the awareness of the opportunity to support them.
Yep, that's great. And since I know we're gonna go over the time and just make sure we answer all the questions, but just because I do want to, for folks who might have to leave, you know, on the time in case they have other things going on, I'm just gonna launch this poll that you can do in the background while Jared answers the next question of, you know, which platform would you use for the candidate community that we're building? We already have it on Discord, which Quinn will drop in the chat here. But if there are other platforms that are more, you know, at home for you, would love to know that so that we can make sure we're creating community in all the places that you actually are, and so that we can keep this kind of connection going. And so Aiden was asking some really great questions. I think I can kind of merge two of their questions together. You know, so one was, as an independent candidate, what affordable resources, consultants, nonprofits are available to help with campaign treasurer duties, such as accounting, producing forms, filing. We've had challenges navigating the guides and trying to work with the city clerk's office and FPPC when complications arise. So that I'll just pause there with that, because obviously the campaign treasurer,
Yeah.
kind of that stuff is often quite technical. So what are your recommendations there?
Yeah, there are sort of two roles that often get filled on a campaign, and one is the treasurer, who generally is a person who is a professional. They may not necessarily be an accountant, but they've filed campaign compliance. They've experienced that whole world many, many, many times over. In my experience, they're not particularly expensive, especially if you're working on a more local campaign. And more often than not, the way that they are billing is through volume. So if you're raising a lot of money, which is true of many candidates, right? They're also being busier, and therefore they're charging more for their time. But if you're a candidate who's running a more modest campaign, and you're not necessarily raising millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars, which oftentimes is the case for very local campaigns, the treasurer is also charging you a much more reasonable fee. So we have a network of vendors that we're working to make available, and just by publishing information on people that you can reach out to, who I think could be a valuable resource for folks who are looking for help, not just in treasury, but in other areas of their campaign. But the other thing I will say is, in addition to a treasurer, a lot of times on the campaign, there is, they go by assistant treasurers, deputy treasurers. Sometimes for offices like the federal positions, you actually can put them on your paperwork too. And more often than not, those are folks who are much closer to the campaign, even if they don't have a background in campaign compliance. These are folks who maybe want to volunteer. They're good with numbers. They might have an accounting background, and they want to be helpful to your campaign. And that's more of a traditional bookkeeper. And those two people work hand in glove to make sure that obviously the sort of technical compliance side of the equation is handled by an expert, but the day-to-day, accounting of the campaign absolutely can be done by someone who is not as technically trained in that kind of experience. And that way you might be saving resources too, because if a volunteer says, hey, I'm really good with numbers, I'm a bookkeeper maybe, or someone who just knows how to, keep accounts of things, that person can be put in a position where they can really be helpful. And then you're only consulting this sort of expert treasurer as needed. And generally that's around campaign finance reporting periods, which is sometimes quarterly, and with occasion later in the cycle and more frequently. But I think that's a good recipe that can be followed. It's a little bit, in the weeds, but the idea of having sort of a non-specialized but good accountant type person on the team who's close to you and might be doing it as a volunteer, paired with a as needed, expert sort of treasurer.
Yep, I'm that kind of friend. Like I'm the friend who worked in operations and worked in finance, right? Like, just look for your friends who, people in your community who have a job where they probably have a good aptitude for that kind of stuff and can read legal documents, government websites, and make sense of it. And then, another question I think that's relevant from Aiden here. As a candidate running in a low-income, student-heavy district that has been historically underserved by city politics, we've struggled to secure funding. I think that situation might apply to other folks, right? Where income community, right? Lots of reasons why maybe funding is tough. What strategies or resources does Good Party recommend for seed funding and or grassroots funding?
Oof, that's a good question. I think where we plug in, Good Party's mission has always been to make people matter more than money in our democracy. And I think it's important to name, even though the realities are of campaigns, that there will, I think, at least for the foreseeable future, always require some degree of resource, especially to get a campaign off the ground. But hopefully, if we're successful, right, not to the tune of the hundreds of billions of dollars that seem to get spent every election cycle. In the situation where you're sort of just getting started, especially I think for any candidate who's just getting started, raising their resources to seed a campaign can be daunting and a little bit overwhelming. And the recommendations that we would make and the tools that we've built can help with this for sure. but there is a degree of manual organization that goes into it as well, is putting yourself in a position where you are really organized around who in your community can contribute. And what I tell candidates all the time is almost everybody, and I don't want to say everyone, but almost everyone, right, has people in their network who want to see them succeed and will be supportive of them. And I think if you don't, the question of running for office being obviously the best sort of next step, but most people have folks that they can rely upon, that they can lean on, who want to see them do well. And I think what happens sometimes in the campaign environment is that it's a combination of discomfort in asking, but also disorganization in knowing who to ask, that creates friction with not just raising resources financially, but also just building support for your campaign, because there's not enough organization and proactive action to bring it in. So what I would encourage people who are in this position to do is to honestly just take a download of your network, whether it's 10 people, 100 people, more, however many people it is, and get them under one roof. You know, take your phone contacts and download them, your email contacts and download them into a spreadsheet or whatever it is. Victoria's maybe laughing because I have an affinity for spreadsheets that we're trying to violently remove me of doing. But if you have a CRM, great. But get all of your contacts into one place so that it's organized, right? And then take some time to think through what you would be comfortable asking of each person, and then force yourself, I think, to ask. And you can use the tools to help you come up with scripts. You can use the tools to help send emails that might help you kind of get past the first stage of discomfort. And it doesn't have to be a lot, right? If you're comfortable going to someone and saying, I'll use myself as an example, hey, Victoria, we're really close. I know you think I'm smart and a really good person. I hope. Would you be comfortable contributing $10 to my campaign, because it's going to go a long way in getting this thing off the ground? I think that's a more compelling ask than sort of saying, hey, can you give me some money? I don't know how much, but I know I need something to get started. Making a personalized ask, something that you think the person is, capable and willing to do just because they know you, and you're not asking for something that you would be uncomfortable asking of someone else, I think is going to help. And then the way to do that is just to sort of rinse and repeat until you're at a place where you have what you need.
That makes sense. And Eric just put in the chat too, received 95% return on that investment of making personal contact, right? And doing that one-on-one. So, it's just making the right ask to the right person. We do have a couple more questions. I just also put in the chat in case anyone has to drop and is not already part of the Discord community that we just started. There's a link there in the chat, and also a link to watch a video for how to access the private channel. It's exclusive for candidates. I think this will also be in pretty much everyone's inbox as well, if you want to go back to the email that you found your way to this event at. And we did see in the results from the poll, which I'll just share, since you got to see the results of the poll. We can't keep that secret. And it was multiple choice. So 75%-ish people want more Zoom events like this. 50% on Discord, 58% on Facebook groups, and then a little bit on Slack. So we've definitely got some room to keep growing this community and make sure we're in places that are going to be helpful for you to access your peers, and then also be able to ask questions to people like Jared, right? And we're adding more campaign consultants and strategists to the team who are going to be supporting all of our candidates, which is super exciting. 2 more questions for you. Graham asked, what's the best and easiest website builder that also includes a way to capture donations that helps us launch?
Good question. I have to give a shout out to Mateo on our product team, because there's a site that he speaks highly of, but I'm not gonna put myself forward and risk getting it wrong. But we can follow up with this information when we talk one-on-one, or we can even include that in the resource guide and the vendor list that we're putting together. Sorry, Mateo, about that. There are a lot of different sites that are out there. A lot of them are actively using these AI products that are out there to improve the efficiency of creating a website. In the past, for me, I may be dating myself. I've used Wix and Squarespace, like I think a lot of people who build websites. I will tell you for sure that if you are built at the stage where you're building a campaign website, absolutely go into Good Party's tools and use the website sitemap template that we built. So it won't necessarily build you a website, but the content that you need to populate that site can be absolutely drafted um, in the AI tools. And I think what you'll find is that it'll help you uh, limit the sort of the process of building a website to just porting and copying and pasting things over. It's a good action. We are working again on these sort of recommended vendors that exist on our site, and we can make sure that they get sent around and that you will be able to find them so that you can sift through and find one that you're comfortable with.
Yep, our goal is to kind of be the portal for you to get everything you need, whether we're providing it or we're, passing you to a trusted, vendor that can do that better than we can, right? So we're trying to do everything we can and then not, be the be all end all where we don't have to be. And then Sheila was asking, please, it'd be great to hear about what the volunteer section of Discord is and is not. What is the goal and how do candidates access that section?
Yeah, so the volunteer section on Discord is sort of where we marry candidates and people who want to support them. And what you'll find if you've been in the channel already, you may have already seen this, but it is a really exciting and energetic hub where people who are willing to contribute their time to Good Party in any way that they know how can interact with candidates. They can volunteer their time in a sort of unstructured way and say, hey, I've got this particular superpower that I've been dying to put to use on a campaign, and if this is something that's of interest to you, I'd love to get involved and talk about it. It's also a place where our team is organizing these campaign actions to be able to make it a seamless process for people who maybe want to take the top priority actions that move the needle in a campaign. We want to make sure people are organized and are having a good experience. So we organize people in Discord. We make announcements on when there are opportunities to get involved in a sort of more supervised and organized way. And if you're a candidate who's running in there, I think the first step to sort of get involved on this side and to maybe tap into that volunteer network is to just introduce yourself. Say who you are, why you're running, what brought you to us, to Good Party, because I think that's the thread that ties everybody together is this mission that we're all on to change our politics for the better. And talk about what you're up to. And I think what you'll find is there are people who are in there who want to be supportive. And if you're running into a particular problem that you're looking to have resolved, there are plenty of people in that channel who may step forward and say, hey, I happen to have ideas on how we can fix this together.
That's great. And yeah, Jared, what would be your closing thoughts just to bring it back to the main topic here tonight of launching your campaign? What's your closing wisdom?
Goodness. I think more than anything, I hope that this was first and foremost a useful session for you guys. I think that the point of this type of programming is not just to bring everyone together, which we always want to be doing, but that it's an opportunity for us to try and help people who are living and breathing a campaign get some resource and get some insight into how to do the things that maybe they know they need to be doing or even potentially struggling with as effectively as possible. So I appreciate you guys for just being here and for coming. I hope you took some value out of it. We're going to be doing a lot more of these, and I think it'll be an opportunity to get to know each other more and also, hopefully get some wins on the board this year. I think the takeaway is that launching a campaign is a really important moment in a campaign's life cycle. It's something that is an opportunity for candidates to put themselves out there and to build momentum and awareness and support for what they're doing. It's not maybe as simple as someone might envision, or even as sort of dramatic as someone might envision, as putting on a suit jacket and a tie and getting up and giving a big speech. But there is some stuff that goes into it that's going to make sure that ultimately you get the most out of the opportunity, and that the opportunity should be done on your terms as a candidate. It should be dictated by at a time where you're comfortable and you feel like you have as much momentum as you possibly can. And most importantly, from our perspective, we've built a lot of tools that we think can help you do that. So make sure that if you haven't already, get into your AI campaign dashboard. Experiment with the campaign tool. If you're imminently planning a campaign launch, I hope that you go in there and use some of that launch resource, whether it's a press release or the social copy, emails, videos, whatever it is, whatever you think is the secret recipe to your campaign launch. I hope you use our tools to help make that a more manageable and efficient and hopefully effective process. We'll be looking out. We are always eager to be supportive of campaigns when they're at this stage in their life cycle. If you ever have questions, reach out to us. We're going to help make the best and highest use of the tools that we're building, but also continue to have conversations like this to make sure that the campaign experience, starting with launch, but all the way through, is as inspiring and effective and hopefully fulfilling for all of you as possible.
Agreed. And Khalil just put the proverb in the chat of, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And obviously, you're all running for office, on your, in your own respective communities, but this is a community that we're trying to build across candidates so that you don't feel alone, and obviously build your community around you to make sure you're not doing it alone either. And lots of really great wisdom tonight. Thank you so much for everyone who joined. I put in the chat, if you're not on the tools yet, you can just easily get straight in there. It's goodparty.org/run-for-office, or just on our main homepage, goodparty.org, you'll see the Run for Office section that will bring you straight in there. And then I also put in the chat the link to join the Discord server and the video for how you can access that private channel that's just for candidates. And then we'll be working on spinning up some other places. So we'll be in touch over email so that we can, stay connected, and more events like these will come so we can support you on your journey. So thank you so much. Really happy with everyone who came, and all the participation in the chat was fantastic. Thanks again, Jared. Saw a lot of folks in the chat just saying thank you. This was super valuable. So I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a really wonderful evening. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Be well. Thank you. Good luck with your launches. Go launch. Woo!